Hello and welcome to my philosophy essays. This is part two of my essay Define Wisdom, Explain Why It is a Virtue and Discuss How It Can Be Gained. So we're on page 6, so I'll start reading now. Is wisdom merely instrumentally valuable? One might argue that wisdom is valuable only because it helps individuals obtain other goods. On this view, wisdom is an instrument for achieving happiness, stability or social success rather than a virtue valuable in itself. However, wisdom appears to possess both instrumental and intrinsic value. It is instrumentally valuable because it improves decision-making, reduces avoidable error, and enables the coordination of competing goods. Yet, it is also constitutive of a good human life. To understand one's circumstances, deliberate responsibly, and act for good reasons are not merely methods for obtaining flourishing, they are components of flourishing. A life governed entirely by impulse, manipulation, or unexamined convention would remain deficient even if it happened to produce pleasure or success. Wisdom gives rational shape to a life. It enables a person to become an active author of their conduct rather than a passive product of appetite or social pressure. This does not imply that wise people will always prosper. A wise decision may involve sacrifice, loss, or the acceptance of unavoidable suffering. Wisdom is not a guarantee of favorable outcomes because many circumstances lie beyond individual control. Its value lies in enabling the person to respond well to circumstances, including those that cannot be controlled. How wisdom can be gained? Education and the pursuit of knowledge. Wisdom requires knowledge of the world. Good judgment cannot be reliably exercised where the relevant facts are ignored. Education expands an individual's conceptual resources, introduces alternative perspectives, and develops the ability to analyze arguments. Philosophical education is especially relevant because it trains individuals to identify assumptions, distinguish valid from invalid reasoning, and examine competing conceptions of the good. Historical study reveals the consequences of institutions and decisions. Scientific knowledge corrects mistaken beliefs about caution. Literature can deepen understanding of motives, conflict, and human vulnerability. Nevertheless, formal education does not guarantee wisdom. It may produce specialized expertise without moral maturity. The educated person may use intellectual sophistication to rationalize prejudice or self-interest. Education contributes to wisdom only when knowledge is integrated with reflection and ethical responsibility. Excuse me. Experience. Experience is often regarded as the principal source of wisdom. Practical judgment improves through engagement with real circumstances, especially where decisions have complex and unpredictable consequences. Experience exposes the limitations of abstract theories and teaches sensitivity to context. However, experience alone is insufficient. A person may repeat the same errors for many years. Experience becomes educational only when it is interpreted. The passage of time does not automatically transform events into understanding. Reflection is required to identify patterns, recognize responsibility, and revise future conduct. Furthermore, experience may reinforce prejudice if it is interpreted selectively. An individual may remember evidence that supports prior beliefs while ignoring counterexamples. Wisdom therefore depends not simply on having experiences, but on examining them critically. Reflection. Reflection transforms experience into learning. It involves asking what occurred while it occurred, which assumptions shaped the decision, and how alternative choices might have produced different outcomes. Reflective agents examine both their successes and their failures. Failure may contribute particularly strongly to wisdom because it disrupts overconfidence. It reveals the gap between intention and consequence. Yet suffering and failure do not automatically make a person wise. They may instead produce resentment, fear, or cynicism. Their value depends on whether they are processed honestly and constructively. Reflection must include moral as well as strategic evaluation. It is not enough to ask how an objective could have been achieved more efficiently. The agent must also ask whether the objective was worth pursuing and whether others were treated justly. Without this evaluative dimension, reflection produces improved technique rather than wisdom. I'm just going to copy that because I'm going to make use of that for something else. Dialogue and engagement with others. Wisdom is difficult to develop in isolation. Dialogue exposes individuals to experiences, arguments, and moral perspectives that differ from their own. Through conversation, assumptions become visible and judgments can be tested. The Socratic method illustrates the importance of questioning. Socrates does not simply transmit doctrines, he challenges interlocutors to define their concepts, examine contradictions, and recognize the limits of their understanding. Wisdom grows through disciplined inquiry rather than passive acceptance. Dialogue is especially important because human beings are vulnerable to self-deception. Individuals frequently interpret their motives favorably and minimize the effects of their actions on others. Trusted critics, mentors, and colleagues can identify errors that the individual cannot easily perceive. The acquisition of wisdom therefore requires the ability to listen. Listening is not mere politeness, it is an epistemic practice through which the agent recognizes the relevant understanding may be distributed among different people. Those directly affected by a decision may possess knowledge unavailable to experts or authorities. Moral habituation. Aristotle maintains the moral virtues are developed through habituation, so people become just by performing just actions and courageous by acting courageously. Wisdom similarly develops through repeated practice in deliberation and responsible action. Habituation matters because judgment is influenced by character. A person dominated by greed, anger, or vanity may possess accurate information but interpret it through distorted priorities. Moral discipline gradually shapes emotional responses so that the agent becomes more receptive to relevant reasons. This process does not mean uncritically following convention. Habits must themselves be examined. Nevertheless, repeated action forms dispositions. A person who repeatedly practices honesty, patience, and self-restraint becomes more capable of recognizing when these qualities are required. Intellectual humility. Wisdom grows when individuals become capable of acknowledging error. Intellectual humility permits belief revision and prevents identity from becoming inseparable from a particular opinion. Without humility, evidence is treated as a threat rather than as an opportunity for correction. Humility can be cultivated by distinguishing confidence from certainty. Individuals may act decisively while recognizing that their judgment remains fallible. They can state the grounds of a decision, identify uncertainties, and specify what evidence would justify revision. This practice is especially important in complex moral and political questions. Complete certainty is rarely available, yet action may still be necessary. Wisdom lies neither in dogmatic confidence nor in permanent indecision. It lies in proportioning confidence to evidence and remaining willing to reconsider. Emotional regulation and self-knowledge. Wise judgment also requires knowledge of oneself. Emotions shape attention, interpretation, and decision-making. Anger may exaggerate wrongdoing, fear may exaggerate danger, and desire may conceal risk. Wisdom does not require the elimination of emotion. Emotions often reveal what matters, however, they must be interpreted and regulated. Self-knowledge helps individuals recognize recurring biases and vulnerabilities. A person who understands that they become defensive under criticism, can pause before responding. Someone aware of a tendency towards overconfidence can seek external evaluation. Such practices convert self-awareness into improved judgment. The ancient philosophical injunction to know oneself is therefore central to wisdom. A person who misunderstands their own motives is poorly positioned to deliberate responsibly about action. Exposure to complexity. Wisdom develops through engagement with cases in which values conflict and rules do not yield immediate answers. Simple situations permit routine responses. Difficult situations require discernment. Case-based learning, professional supervision, literature, biography, and historical analysis can expose individuals to such complexity. These resources allow the learner to examine difficult choices without experiencing every consequence personally. They develop moral imagination by showing how decisions appear from multiple perspectives. Wisdom requires the capacity to tolerate ambiguity. This does not mean abandoning truth or moral standards. It means recognizing that several legitimate considerations may be present simultaneously. Mature judgment often involves choosing between imperfect alternatives rather than identifying a completely unproblematic option. Can wisdom be taught? The claim that wisdom can be gained raises the question of whether it can be taught. Some aspects can clearly be taught. Individuals can learn logical reasoning, ethical theories, decision-making frameworks, and relevant factual knowledge. They can study examples of wise and unwise conduct. However, wisdom cannot be transferred in the same manner as factual information. A teacher can explain the concept of practical judgment, but cannot guarantee that the student will exercise it under pressure. Wisdom requires the formation of perception, motivation, and character. It is therefore more accurate to say that wisdom can be cultivated rather than simply taught. Teachers, institutions, and communities can create conditions that support its development. These conditions include exposure to demanding questions, opportunities for responsibility, constructive criticism, and examples of good judgment. The learner must nevertheless participate actively in the process. Mentorship may be particularly valuable because it connects abstract principles to concrete practice. A mentor can explain not only what decision was made, but why particular features of the situation were considered important. Yet even mentorship must avoid encouraging dependency. The objective is to develop independent judgment rather than imitation. So, objections to the concept of wisdom. One objection is that wisdom is culturally relative. Different societies hold different conceptions of the good life, making it difficult to identify universal standards of wise judgment. This objection has force because wisdom is partly shaped by social practices and moral traditions. Nevertheless, cultural variation does not eliminate the possibility of rational evaluation. Practices can be assessed according to their coherence, consequences, and treatment of persons. Furthermore, many features associated with wisdom, such as humility, concern for consequences, resistance to impulsiveness, and willingness to learn, appear valuable across diverse traditions. A second objection is that wisdom is too vague to function as a meaningful virtue. Because wise judgment depends on context, almost any decision might be defended after the event as an exercise of wisdom. The response is that context sensitivity does not imply arbitrariness. Wise judgments can be evaluated according to the quality of the reasons offered, the adequacy of the evidence considered, the inclusion of affected interests, and the agent's openness to revision. Wisdom may not produce algorithmic certainty, but neither is it beyond rational assessment. A third objection is that wisdom may conflict with moral principle. Appeals to practical judgment can become excuses for abandoning rules whenever compliance is inconvenient. Okay, so I'm going to put a pause in that and make a third part to this essay. So, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe if you are enjoying the reading. So thank you, and I will continue this.